Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I believe this is the last Sunday of 2019. All right, next Sunday we'll be into a new year. As my understanding, we're going to have another teacher also who will be coming in who's really into prophecy, and we will be team teaching like I used to do with Robert. Okay, but we're going to continue in chapter 11. Now, for you history buffs, this is in a way, a historical narrative, as well as being one of the most comprehensive and detailed prophetic events of future events found anywhere in the Old Testament. It lays out prophecy meticulously. In fact, it's so meticulous in the details that many liberal scholars cannot accept that such intricate fulfillment of prophecy is possible. So we began last week looking at some of these historic details, as laid out in this 11th chapter of Daniel. Now, this is also the chapter where those silent years are dictated. So we're kind of breaking this up a little differently in that we're dealing with chapters 11, 1 to 35 in this first two sessions. Then in the next two sessions, we'll be dealing from 35 all the way to the end of chapter 12, which is a very short chapter. Now, we've already gone through this many times. We know the Bible is, the Daniel is divided into two sections, the historical sections, which included the deportation, from Israel to Babylon of Daniel and his friends, Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the incident at the fiery furnace, Nebuchadnezzar being brought down because of his pride, the fall of Babylon. Then we moved into the Medo-Persian Empire, and we had the incident in Daniel's den. We also have pointed out that chapters 2 to 7 are in Aramaic because they deal with Gentile history. The second division are division chapters from 7 to 12. Chapter 7 dealt with what we call the times of the Gentile. Chapter 8, which is really critical in understanding what we're dealing with now in chapter 11, and that's the rise of Alexander the Great. 9 is the key chapter that you need to understand if you want to understand end-time prophecy. You don't understand chapter 9, you will not understand end-time prophecy. Then we began to take what we call a glimpse of the dark side. We began to see that there are spiritual forces going on, spiritual warfare. As they said in Ephesians, we war not against, principles and powers, but against these powers that are in dark places. 11 is where we are now. It's outlining those what we call the silent years, and even though it's past to us, from Daniel's perspective, it was future. We're going to wrap up with the consummation of all things. And we've already pointed out that the book of Daniel is not in chronological order. When you put it in chronological order, chapter 7 and 8 become before chapter 4. Then the events after chapter 8 take place with chapters 5 and 6. Then 9 and 10 are in chronological order. As we pointed out, the chapters 2 to 7 deal with the Gentiles. That's why it is written in Aramaic. But from that point on, from chapter 8 on, the key focus is Israel. Remember, the Bible is focused on Israel. And this is especially true in the chapters that we're dealing with. Now, as I pointed out, You need to really understand Daniel 8, that's the ram and the goat, when we're dealing with Alexander the Great. This took place 2 years after the vision that Daniel had in chapter 7, but 12 years before the fall of Darius in Daniel 5. So that we know that we're dealing with the ram and the he-goat is Alexander conquering Persia. Okay, so the ram, which is Persia, is defeated by the goat, which is Alexander. We know that Alexander was a notable horn, and his kingdom was divided into 4 separate groups. We're later on going to look at this thing called the little horn, which is also a key to understanding end times. And Daniel did interpret this chapter for us, and he made it clear that Alexander was this leader from the west who subdued the Medo-Persian Empire, which was divided into 4 sections: Cassander, Lysimachus, Ptolemy, and Seleucus, okay, are key individuals, but the 2 primary key individuals is Ptolemy and Seleucus. So we jumped into Daniel 11, and we pointed out it's broken into the first 2 chapters deal with that Persian Empire. The next chapters 3 to 4, the Greek Empire. 5 to 35, there's this conflict between the Seleucid and Ptolemies. Remembering that the Seleucid and Ptolemy are both part of the Greek Empire, but it's divided into 4 kingdoms. The Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemy Empire are located in such a way that Israel is a buffer state, and they were at odds with each other, so Israel was always caught in the middle. And remembering the Bible is about Israel. So naturally, because it's caught in the middle of these 2 conflicts, and these are the 2 biggest powers in the Greek Empire, okay, but they're always battling between each other, and Israel is right in between the 2 of them. And also, this is the events that took place between the Testaments. This is that period of history between the Testaments. Then when later on we'll get into chapters 36, we'll be talking about the willful king. We'll take a look at the Armageddon scenario. And even though we're going to talk about Antiochus Epiphanes, who is a shadow of the Antichrist, we'll be talking about him even more as we go along. Kind of in a way of review, chapters 1 to 2 covers the Persian Empire from Cyrus to Artaxerxes Longimanus, and that's important because Artaxerxes Longimanus is the one that issued that decree that triggered the mathematical prophecy leading from the time that gave that period of time that pointed to the precise moment that Jesus Christ would get on the donkey and reveal himself as King of the Jews. And just reading this chapter quickly, I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I, stood to confirm and strengthen him. Now will I show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than they all, and by his strength through his riches he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. And remember, this is the angel speaking to Daniel. So he says, I also in the first year there with me, even I stood to confirm and strengthen him. It's the angel who's speaking. So he's saying I, referring to himself. And the person he is strengthening is Darius, which shows or indicates that God's angels, okay, work through people, okay? And sometimes the person that they're working through may not be someone who has accepted Jesus Christ. I mean, Nebuchadnezzar, the angels used him to punish Israel. And he did the same thing with the Assyrians. He used them to punish Israel. They were not chosen, okay? But he also says that the kingdom shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia. The 4th shall be richer than they all, and by his strength, his riches shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. And we went through sort of this chart last week, We have first Cyrus. The three kings that he was talking about is Cambyses, Artaxerxes, and Darius, Histophanes. And then the fourth, which was Xerxes, who was the king in the book of Esther, is the one who was far richer. Now, he doesn't really cover Artaxerxes Longimanus, but he comes in right after Xerxes. And he's in Daniel 9. He's also the one who is in charge during the time of Nehemiah. Then we got to chapters 3 to 4, and it said, a mighty king shall stand up and shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided toward the four winds of heaven, and not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up even for others, those besides those. And basically what we have is a breakdown of the rule of Alexander the Great. Okay? And as we said before, this is outlined in Daniel 8, and the kingdom, the Greek Empire comes into power under Alexander the Great. There are four generals, two that we're going to be focused on primarily, which is the Seleucus and Ptolemy. Seleucus, who ruled Syria by Babylon, and Ptolemy, Egypt. And I showed it on the map. Cassander, he took the far west. Lysimachus, he took that area that we associate with Turkey or Asia Minor during the time of the Roman Empire. Seleucus, he took the east, then portion of the kingdom. Ptolemy, the southern portion of the kingdom. Okay, because remember, we're under the Greek Empire now, and like I said, caught in the middle was who? Israel. They're constantly in battle, and this is also the period of time that we're talking about. People say it's the so-called silent years, but the Bible actually outlines it in advance of Daniel's day. So once again, Cassander is Macedonia and Greece. Lysimachus, Asia Minor and Thrace. Seleucus is Syria, also Babylon. And Ptolemy, Egypt, also Arab, and Israel kind of is mostly was in his territory. So the two that we focus on is Syria, which is Seleucus, and Egypt, which is Ptolemy. Now, verse 5, I'm reviewing quickly what we went through last week, and then we're going to get into more details as we move along. And the king of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes shall be strong above him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. So, as I said, we are seeing this detailed prophecy of future conflicts that would develop between these two generals of Alexander's empire. The descendants of Ptolemy in Egypt and those of Seleucus in Syria are constantly at odds with each other. And they are detailed as the kings of the south, which is Ptolemy, kings of the south, and the kings of the north, which is Seleucus. And as I said, these conflicts are outlined because of their impact upon Israel. Now, the king of the north, which is the Seleucus Empire, became stronger. And it says, and the king of the south shall be strong. Okay? And one of his princes, and he shall be strong above him and have dominion, and shall have great dominion. So here's kind of a breakdown of the two. The empire is Greek, but the two generals, the two regions, okay, the Ptolemies and the Seleucids, okay? And so in the Ptolemy side, you have, I believe it's like 7 kings or rulers. Most one that we want to keep in mind is that Ptolemy II of Philadelphia, which is the one who had the Septuagint, It was under his rule that the Septuagint was commissioned, okay, and this was around 270 BC. Very important work product. And then we have the kings in the north, and these are the Antiochuses, the Seleucids. When you hear the term Antiochus, most of the time you're referring to someone who's of the Seleucid Empire. On the north, when you hear Ptolemy, Epiphanes, Epiphanes could be on either side. Remember, these are not names per se as so much as they are titles. Okay, so when we got to chapter 6, we start getting into some of the details. It said, in the end of years, they shall join themselves together, for the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement, but she shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand, nor his arm, but she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengthened her in these times. This is very detailed, okay? Bernice was the daughter of Ptolemy II, also known as Ptolemy of Philadelphus. And she was married to Antiochus, or Theos, the third king of Syria. And many intrigues and murders followed this political arrangement, and ultimately Bernice is murdered. Okay, now I went into more detail last week, but I'm just kind of hitting some of the highlights. Verse 7, but out of the branch of her root shall one stand up in his estate, which shall come with an army, and shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north, and shall deal against them, and shall prevail. Okay, so here in the history, you have what Daniel wrote, that the historical record shows that Ptolemy, Ergitus, I can't pronounce his name, but he was the brother of Bernice, who was murdered, and he invaded Syria. He seized the port of Antioch and overran the Seleucid Empire as far as Babylon. And it says, and he shall deal against them and shall prevail. That was her brother who prevailed. This is very detailed stuff, okay? Verse 8, and he shall carry captives into Egypt, their gods, with their princes, and with their precious vessels of silver and of gold, and he shall continue more years than the king of the north. And the spoils that they took from Egypt included 400 talents of gold, 40,000 talents of silver, 25 idols, okay? They say these included some that were carried from Egypt by Cambyses 280 years earlier. And he outlived his rivals, okay, by about 4+ years, all right? 9, verses 9 to 10. So the king of the south shall come into this kingdom, and shall return unto his own land. But his son shall be stirred up, and shall assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overflow and pass through, then shall he return and be stirred up even to his fortress. So once again, we need to look at the historical record. How did this manifest? Well, like I said, there were lots of intrigues that were taking place. And this time, they were involving the sons of the northern kingdom. One of these sons, okay, soon to became known as Antiochus the Great. And that's a key figure because we are going to talk about Antiochus the Great. But ultimately, Ptolemy IV celebrated his victory by a tour of the eastern Mediterranean province, including Jerusalem. He was prevented from entering the Holy of... Now, this is interesting because he wanted to enter the Holy of Holies, but he was prevented from doing so. Okay? By paralysis. There are certain, and I'll touch upon this a little bit more, but historically there have been several attempts by different rulers to get into the Holy of Holies, but God always intervened to prevent it, except for 2 critical moments, which are critical to understanding prophecy. Okay, one is the key that's going to be given in Daniel, and the other is going to be the description of that event that's going to be given in Revelations. Okay? Moving on. And the king of the south shall be moved with choler, and shall come forth and fight with him, even with the king of the north. And he shall set forth a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given unto his hand. And he hath taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up, and he shall be cast down many 10,000, but he shall not be strengthened by it. Okay? Basically, this is a description of how Ptolemy Philoper gathered his army and defeated the approaching Syrians. I'm rushing because I want to get to where we kind of left off, and we're about almost there right now. And the king of the north shall return, and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come after certain years with a great army with many riches. And in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. Also the robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish division, but they shall fall. So, just real briefly, not as detailed as we went last week, but this describes the death of Ptolemy IV. His son, who was 4 years old, succeeded him as Ptolemy IV Epiphanes. This was around 203, 181 BC. 12 years after the Battle of Raphia, Antiochus III set out with a great army, then before the conquest of the Egyptian territory. Now, that passage, in those times shall many stand up against the king of the south. This included Antiochus and his ally Philip of Macedonia, as well as risings among the vessels of Egypt around 200 BC. Okay, so we're going to start slowing it down a little bit as we now are kind of getting to where we left off last week. So the king of the north shall come and cast up a mount and take the most fierce cities, and the arms of the south shall not withstand neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. But he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him, for he shall stand in the glorious land, which by his hand shall be consumed. So in this verse, what took place historically was Antiochus the Great returned with a larger army. So the king of the north shall come and cast up many and take the most fenced cities. Okay? And in order to reach Egypt, you know who he had to go through? Israel. He had to go through Israel. And this is where we get that term here. It says the glorious land. We know the glorious land is an idiom for Israel. And constantly, Israel was devastated or overrun by the conflicts between these two divisions that were constantly in conflict with each other. And this is sort of describing one of those conflicts. Verse 17, and he shall set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do, and shall give him the daughter of women, corrupting her, but she shall not stand on his side, neither be for him. Now you may read this and you say, oh, you just pass it glide, but this is interesting historical information. Okay? And around 197 BC, Antiochus III set out with a fleet to attack Cilicia. And Cilicia, Lycia, and Caria, which were under Egyptian control. However, he encountered a disastrous defeat by an upstart power rising on the banks of the Tiber. And we're talking about Rome. So he talks about the daughter of women. Well, this was Antiochus' daughter, Cleopatra. Not the Cleopatra that you see in the movies. This is same name but different person. Now, she was still young, a young girl. She was under the care of her mother's nurse, but she was given in a political marriage to Ptolemy Epiphanes, who were, the Ptolemies were the rulers of Egypt. Now, this was arranged in 197 BC and concerned around 193 BC. The groom was only about 10 years old. Now, it was Antiochus' hope, it was his belief that his daughter, who was older, was going to move this young king in such a way that he would gain control of Egypt. Okay, now read what he says. He shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do, and he shall give him the daughter of women, talking about the daughter of Antiochus, corrupting her, but she shall not stand on his side. Well, she actually became very devoted to her husband and sided against Egypt and her father. And so here you have very detailed information of what took place historically. 18 and 19. And after this shall he turn his face unto the isles, and shall take many, but a prince for his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease. Without his own reproach he shall cause it to turn upon him. Then he shall turn his face toward the fort of his own land, and he shall stumble, fall, and not be found. So what took place historically in this of this description? Well, in 196 BC, Antiochus had turned toward the west in Greece, which we call Asia Minor, and crossed the Hellespont to seize part of Thrace. It was Hannibal, the Carthaginian general, who encouraged Antiochus III to fight the Romans in 191 BC. Antiochus was defeated by the Romans at Thermopylae. In 190 BC, his army of 80,000 suffered a defeat in a decisive battle near Smyrna, where the Roman commander Lucius Scipio forced him to renounce his claims in Europe and in Asia Minor. He had to surrender all territories west of Tarsus Mountains and paid a heavy tribute of 15,000 talents. Some said there was 30 million, but if you go by our terms today, it's about 15 times 30 million. It's a lot of money. And he was ruined. He was totally ruined. Okay, so he says he shall turn his face toward the fort of his own land and shall stumble and fall and not be found. Well, what he did was, when he was ruined, he was lost, and what he did was he ran back home and plundered his own kingdom's temples. Okay, taking the what he could from his own lands. Verse 20, then shall stand up his estate a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom, but within a few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. Then this is referring to Seleucus the fourth, or Seleucus Philopator, who succeeded Antiochus III. Now you got to remember that sometimes these verses skip some historic things, so it's not like everything happens successively, step by step. So they'll skip over some generations of events. But anyway, Antiochus III gave his son Demetrius as a hostage in the place of his brother Antiochus to meet heavy Roman tribute. And this is the thing, when he talks about the taxes, these are taxes placed upon Israel. He oppressed Israel through heavy taxation. This is actually recorded in the book of Maccabees. After 12 years of rule, he is murdered by his treasurer, Helidorius, who hoped to take over, but is out intrigued by Antiochus IV. And this guy is who we're going to be paying attention to, because this is the one who's later called Epiphanes. This is the character who gets there by murder, and he gets there by intrigue, not by battle or anger, okay? And later on, as we move into this guy is going to be a central figure that we're going to be look upon. So when we talk to you about this Antiochus Epiphanes, remember, he's not just a historical figure, he is a type of this beast, this person we call the beast, or the Antichrist that we're going to see in the book of Revelations. 21 to 22. And in his estate shall stand up a vile person to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. And with the arm of a flood shall they be overthrown before him, and he shall be broken, yea, also the prince of the covenant. You know, here you have this vile person. We all know this is this guy, Antiochus Epiphanes. Notice that he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. You know, like I said, he's a type of this beast or this Antichrist to come, and you're going to notice that there's a similarities. When we get to the book of Revelation, guess what he comes by? Peace and by what? Flatteries. Okay, there's some similarities. You see this, and this similarity between this Antiochus Epiphanes and this future world leader to come. Now, it goes on, and with the arm of a flood shall they be overflown from before him, and he shall be broken, yea, also the prince of the covenant. Now, there are certain candidates for this person they're talking to. He could be the son of the Seleucus IV, who was held hostage in Rome. However, the younger son was also named Antiochus, but he was still a baby in Syria. Antiochus IV was the brother of Seleucus IV, who had also been a hostage in Rome for 14 years. And one thing, you know, being a prisoner in Rome for any length of time, you begin to learn something about politics. And when you talk about intrigues and you talk about murders, well, the Romans were masters of it. So by the fact that they were under this Roman influence, they really became very dangerous. Okay? And they learned to do politics in a Roman way. Continue on. Just prior to the murder of his brother by Helidorius, he had been recalled to Antioch. His brother died before he reached the capital, and with the help of King Pergamum, and posing as the guardian of young Antiochus, who was in Syria, Antiochus IV, with numerous intrigues, gained the throne by flattery, chicanery, and murder. Now here when it talks about the prince of the covenant, some think this is a reference to the murder of Onias III, who was the high priest. And one point of interesting note, this is sort of a sidebar. They found letters between this high priest and the king of Sparta, and these letters indicate that the Spartans and the Trojans may have been Jewish, and there's even some evidence that they are from the tribe of Dan. Now, that's just as a little sidebar. But continuing on. And after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully, for he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people. It's interesting at how effective small groups can be in affecting major changes. We see it all the time. Okay, in fact, even in the founding of this nation, there was a small group, okay, that overcame overwhelming odds. It wasn't the majority of the leadership here in America during the Civil War. It was a small percentage that turned the tide. It was not the majority. In the event with Christ, okay, many historians say that it was as few as 13 people that turned the tide against Christ during the crucifixion. During the Maccabean revolt, which we've talked about, you know, you have this handful of individuals that literally sparked a revolution that overcame a mighty empire. Okay, and virtually freed the Jews until the Romans came. And you think about it, how effective has a small group of judges been in changing the character of our nation? It's been a small group of judges. Okay? Thank God that Trump has been working on judges because they could have impact on this nation for years to come. Okay. Back to our verses. Verse 24, and he shall enter peaceably even upon the fattest places of the province, and he shall do that which his fathers have not done, nor his father's father. He shall scatter among them the prey and spoil the riches. Yea, he shall forecast his devices against the strongholds even for a time. And so Antiochus IV, unlike his fathers, he robbed the rich, you know, and gave to the poor, so to speak. So he was like a certain faction today who want to take everything from the rich. Okay, he attacked his enemies when they least expected it. He also had a major conflict between his two nephews, Ptolemy Philopater and Ptolemy the seventh, or Sychon, for the control of Egypt. But he prevailed. 25 to 26. And he shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army. But he shall not stand, for they shall forecast devices against him. Okay? You know, there's all these intrigues going on. Conflicts. Money. Power. We see that stuff going on today. Take, for instance, the UN food programs and the other programs they have where billions and billions of dollars are put into private coffers. In fact, even Osama bin Laden got a lot of this money through the UN, and guess what? A lot of that was U.S. tax dollars. But moving on. And both the king's heart shall be to mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table, but it shall not prosper, and yet the end shall be at this time appointed. Then shall he return unto his land with great riches, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits and return of his own land. Now, the historical record shows that Antiochus took Philometor under his protection, and he was because he was his uncle and he was also a nephew. They would eat together at one table, but there would just be a lot of lying going on. So they'd come in together, and they would discuss policies. Still, despite this fact that they came together, they turned on one another. And when Antiochus returned from his first Egyptian campaign, he had great riches, and he then focused on despoiling the temple in Jerusalem, which gets us to the main point, our main focus, rather, so to speak. So the last part of this verse, and he said he returned unto the land with great riches. His heart shall be against the holy covenant. The holy covenant. We're now he's talking about Israel again. And she shall do exploits and return to his own land. So he actually comes against Israel. At the appointed time he shall return and come toward the south, but it shall not be as the former or the later. And note it, at the time appointed. God's in control. He said, for the ships of Shittim shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved and return and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do so. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsook the holy covenant. Once again. Now we're referring to the second campaign that he had against Egypt. Now in this, Antiochus was less successful and failed to take Alexandria. Furthermore, he encountered the Roman navy. He encountered the Roman navy at Shittim. As he says, so the ships of Shittim was referring to the Roman navy. This information was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls and was a general reference to the people of the Mediterranean, Cyprus in particular. Now the Roman fleet of Caius Papalis, now some of these names I'm torturing, Linnaeus, sailed from Cyprus to Egypt after a stunning Roman victory over Persis of Macedon near, south of Thessalonica. Okay? The intimidation of the Romans caused Antiochus to return in humiliation to Syria. And Antiochus is not the type of person who takes things laying down. So he had to take his anger out on someone, and guess who he chose to take it out on? The Jews. With them that forsake the holy covenant. In a way, we're kind of interpreting what these verses are referring to. Okay? 31 and 32. And arms shall stand out in his heart, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take many of the daily sacrifices, and they shall place, now let's, because now we're getting to some of the key events that we want to focus on pretty much through the rest of this lesson. And he says, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. The abomination that maketh desolate. Okay? We're seeing it here in its historical context. Antiochus IV did many despicable things. He made it illegal to read the Torah. In fact, he made it a capital punishment, penalty of death to do so. He tried to destroy everything associated with Judaism. He slaughtered a pig on the holy altar in Jerusalem, and you know how the Jews feel about pork. And they did it on the holy altar, but the straw that broke the camel's back is when he erected an idol of Zeus in the Holy of Holies. This enraged the core group, that small group that rose up and revolted against him and literally won. Now, Antiochus put the idol in there on his birthday, which is on the Jewish calendar day, the 25th of Kislev. Okay? It took 3 years for the Jews to throw off the yoke of the Seleucid Empire and destroy all the vessels of the temple that the Seleucids under Antiochus put into the temple, because he started replacing all the Jewish vessels with their idols. And it took them 3 years to destroy all those things, rebuild them, and then rededicate the temple. And we all know what the rededication of the temple is called. Hanukkah. Okay? In fact, if you go to, we talked about this before, John 22, where he talks about the Feast of Dedication, and it was winter, is pointing to Hanukkah and validating it. Now, why would the Holy Spirit want to validate this? It's because he's showing us the background of Hanukkah so that we can understand the events leading to the abomination of desecration in the past and understand it in the future. So there's events surrounding this that the Holy Spirit wants us to pay attention to. Without this understanding, we could misunderstand what Jesus said in Matthew 24 and Mark 13 when he had a confidential briefing with 4 of his disciples on his second coming, and he points them to Daniel 9, the Daniel 9 narrative about the abomination of desolation as the key to understanding end-time prophecy. This is important. I know some of this, you can get a little, especially because it's history and you're going through all this stuff. There are some important points. First of all, the Holy Spirit put this detail in here because he wants us to know it. So you just got to power through it, because it's taken me years to find it interesting, because I didn't find it so interesting in my first couple of years. But after about 25 years of going through this, I'm starting to find this really fascinating. It took me 25 years. Hope you don't take you that long. Okay. Now I want to point out that the word abomination in the Bible really points to just false worship. It is an abomination to worship anything but him. Any idol, okay, is an abomination to God. There's a lot of teaching out there, especially by those we call preterists, who try to point to the destruction of the temple as the abomination of desolation. Not so. That temple was totally destroyed. Nobody went into the Holy Holies. And you got to understand that when he talks about this particular abomination, the abomination that maketh desolate, this is the ultimate extreme, okay, of abomination. This is a bridge gone too far. Because here, not only do you worship an idol, but that idol is put on the most holy spot on earth. That most holy spot on earth is the Holy of Holies. Okay? So this is a reference to a specific abomination, and there are a lot of them, and there are some horrendous about, but this is the ultimate. And the Holy of Holies. It was a deliberate move to offend. And it's going to happen again. And as I pointed out, every time some crazy leader tried to get into the Holy Holies, God intervened. For instance, I described one event already, but there was another one, Caligula. He ordered his statue to be put in the Holy of Holies, but Petronius, who was the local general, refused because he understood it would cause an uprising among the Jews that he couldn't handle. Well, Caligula finds out, he gets angry, and he sends an order to kill Petronius. Well, you got to understand, mail didn't travel as fast in those days as it does today. There was no Pony Express, no Air Express, no Amazon Express, none of those things that existed. So they had to send it by sea. Now, when Petronius sent the message when Caligula sent the message to have Petronius killed for not putting his statue in the Holy of Holies, he died 2 weeks after he issued the order. And due to some confusion, the word came that he died before the message came for Petronius to be killed. So Petronius was put off the hook. And every single time someone has tried to get into the Holy of Holies, God intervened, except at these key appointed times. God would not allow premature abomination of desolations to take place. Okay? And it goes on. And as such do wickedly against the covenant shall be corrupt by flatteries, there again, but the people that do know their God shall be strong and do exploits. And this is exactly what happened. The Maccabean family led a revolt that succeeded and led to an end of the rulership by the Hasmoneans, who literally ruled until Rome took over. And they understand among the people, shall instruct many, yet they shall fall by the sword, by flame, and by captivity, and by spoil of many things. And when they shall fall, they shall be holpen with a little help, but many shall cleave to them with flatteries, and some of them understanding shall fall to try them, and to purge, and to make them white, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. And we're going to get more into this in the upcoming sessions. What I want to point out is that in these verses from verses 1 to 35, we covered approximately 135 prophetic statements. Okay? So you can see why I was moving so fast. If I had took time to try and detail 135 prophetic statements, which I had to run through, you can imagine how the time would have taken. And I know this is history. It can be a little boring, but it is essential to distinguish the accuracy of the Bible as compared to many other so-called religious texts. The degree, the meticulousness of what took place here and what actually happened in history is just off the charts. And we will be taking this up a little more as we proceed in the upcoming chapters, and we won't be going, thankfully, in such detailed history as we have, even though we will be dealing with some historical context. Now, so what you need to do before we get into next week, though, is you need to kind of do a little review of this little horn, Antiochus Epiphanes. And you'll find him in Daniel 8. And you can start at verse 9. You can read the entire chapter. And I'm just going to read through it, and we'll bring this to an end. He says, out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceedingly great toward the south, and toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. And we know who we're talking about. And it waxed great, even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. Yea, he magnified himself, even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. The ram, which thou sawest having two horns, are the king of Media and Persia, and the rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Now that being taken, whereas four stood up for it, 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his own power. And in a later time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, the king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up, and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power, and he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper, and practice and shall destroy the mighty of the holy people. And through the policy also he shall cause a craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, and he shall be broken without hand. So it's definitely both historical, but it's also something spiritual and prophetic going on in those verses. Once again, this is the breakdown between the kings of the south and the kings of the north. Okay? And next session, we're going to complete chapter 12, which is really going to be chapter 11 from verses 36 to chapter 12, verse 13. And we're just going to call this the climax of all history. Amen? So we're going to go ahead and close with a word of prayer. And like I said, it's going to get a little bit more interesting, but I just had to go through that detailed history because I want you to understand that there's nothing like the Word of God anywhere on this earth. Father, we praise and thank you for your word, for you're giving us this prophetic glimpse of what's to come, and by showing the detailed accuracy of your word. Father, let us be able to take what you have given unto us, be able to sort of put it into our thinking process so that we can speak to others and show them the distinctive differences between your word and anything else that they may call holy, because it isn't holy, it's nothing but an abomination. And we praise and thank you, Father, that you are using us as instruments and tools to do your will upon this earth. In Jesus'